Tycoon, he told his wife she couldn't have children. 1 year later, he found her at a fair with twins. Tell them 5 minutes, he replied, his voice carrying the weight of authority that came from building a tech empire from scratch. James loosened his Hermes tie slightly as he stared at his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows. At 35, he was younger than most CEOs in the valley, and he wore that achievement like armor. His perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit and meticulously styled hair were just external manifestations of his need for control. The quarterly reports are exceeding projections by 23%, he muttered to himself, rehearsing for the board meeting. Numbers were safe. Numbers were predictable. Unlike emotions, unlike relationships, unlike... His phone buzzed. A message from May. Can we talk tonight? James's jaw tightened. He knew what she wanted to discuss. The same thing she'd been trying to talk about for months. Children, family, the future. He slipped the phone back into his pocket without responding. Send them in, he commanded through the intercom, straightening his tie once more. As the board members filed in, James took his place at the head of the table, his expression a carefully constructed mask of confidence and control. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing, one that would soon shatter every carefully laid plan he'd ever made. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice steady and commanding, let's discuss how we're going to dominate the market this quarter. The morning sun caught his platinum wedding ring as he gestured toward the presentation screen, sending a brief flash of light across the room, a momentary reminder of the personal battle he was fighting at home, even as he waged war in the boardroom. Later that evening, their modernist mansion felt unusually quiet as James pulled into the driveway. Through the kitchen window, he could see May sitting at the dining table, her delicate fingers wrapped around an untouched cup of tea. The steam had long since stopped rising. You didn't answer my message? May said softly as he entered, her voice carrying years of unspoken dreams. James loosened his tie, avoiding her gaze. I was in meetings all day. You're always in meetings, she replied, her words heavy with resignation. Standing up, she moved to the window, her reflection overlapping with the garden she'd planted last spring. The flowers were blooming now, but she seemed to be wilting. I saw Sarah today, May continued, her voice trembling slightly. Her daughter just turned 1. James felt his shoulders tense. May, I'm not getting any younger, James. We've been married for 3 years, and every time I bring up children, you... Because we've discussed this. His voice came out sharper than intended, making May flinch. My career is at a crucial point. The company needs... What about what I need? May's voice cracked, tears welling in her eyes. I gave up my career, my independence. I thought we were building a future together. A family. The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, a car alarm went off in the distance, its wailing echoing the pain in May's heart. I see them, you know, she whispered, pressing her hand against the cool glass of the window. In my dreams, our children, they have your smile and my eyes. They fill this empty house with laughter. James walked over to his home office, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. Dreams don't build empires, May. Reality does. And the reality is, I can't give you what you want right now. As he closed the office door behind him, he didn't see May slide down against the window, her tears finally falling freely. She pulled out a small photo from her pocket, an ultrasound image from her friend Sarah's pregnancy, and held it close to her heart. The sun had set completely now, casting long shadows across their perfect house, their perfect life, their perfect lie. In the growing darkness, 2 people who shared a home had never felt further apart. Mr. Chun, Dr. Thompson began, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. I've reviewed your latest tests, and I must admit, I'm quite perplexed. James's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean, perplexed? Well, the doctor shuffled through the papers. Your initial diagnosis from 3 years ago, there seems to be some discrepancy. The rhythmic drumming of James's fingers stopped abruptly. Discrepancy? You told me I couldn't. His voice trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Medical science isn't always exact, Mr. Chun. Sometimes we see patterns that aren't. Cut to the chase, doctor, James snapped, his carefully maintained control beginning to crack. Dr. Thompson leaned forward, his expression grave. The test results from 3 years ago. They may have been misinterpreted. Recent advances in testing methods suggest that your fertility levels are within normal ranges. The room seemed to spin. James loosened his tie, feeling as if it was choking him. Are you telling me that for 3 years, I've believed, I've told my wife? I understand this is shocking news, Dr. Thompson said softly. But Mr. Chun, you should know that having children is still very much a possibility for you. James stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. The weight of his lies, his control, his fear, it all came crashing down around him. He thought of May's tears last night, of all the nights he'd dismissed her dreams based on a mistake. I need to go, he muttered, reaching for the door. Mr. Chen, Dr. Thompson called after him. Would you like to discuss options for? But James was already gone, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. In his car, he gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white, remembering every harsh word, every dismissal, every time he'd used this diagnosis as a shield against his own fears of inadequacy. His phone buzzed, a message from May. I made an appointment with Dr. Liu for myself today. Need to know if the problem is me. James stared at the message, his vision blurring. How could he tell her now? How could he admit that he'd built their entire life around a lie? That his fear of failure, his need for control, had been based on nothing but a medical misinterpretation. The truth sat heavy in his chest, like a stone weighing him down. But the thought of facing it, of facing May, was more terrifying than any business challenge he'd ever encountered. So, May dear, Eleanor began, delicately cutting into her duck breast. I visited the temple yesterday to pray for grandchildren. The words hung heavy in the air like storm clouds. May's chopsticks trembled slightly. Mother Chan, 3 years of marriage. James's father interrupted, his voice carrying decades of authority. In our day, we had 2 children by then. The Chun family line must continue. James watched as May's face drained of color. He could see her struggling to maintain composure, her knuckles white against the fine bone china. Father, James started, but was cut off again. Your cousin Richard's wife just had their second child, Eleanor continued, as if it were a competition. Such a blessing. The family gathered for the 1-month celebration last week. Of course, you were both too busy to attend. May suddenly stood up, her napkin falling to the floor. Excuse me, she whispered, hurrying from the dining room. Really, James? His mother sighed. What are you waiting for? A man of your position should have heirs. The company needs... Enough! James slammed his hand on the table, making the crystal glasses ring. You don't understand? No, son. His father's voice cut through like steel. You don't understand. This isn't just about you anymore. This is about legacy, about family honor. Your grandfather built this empire from nothing, and you... James pushed back from the table, the legs of his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. He found May in the garden, sitting by the koi pond, tears silently tracking down her cheeks. I'm sorry, he said, standing behind her. For what? May asked, her voice barely audible above the gentle splashing of the fountain. For your parents' expectations? For marrying me? For not being able to give them what they want? The koi fish circled in their endless dance, orange and white flashes beneath the dark water. James watched them, thinking of cycles, of traditions, of expectations that seemed to spiral endlessly. Sometimes, May continued, her voice stronger now, I wonder if you married me because you loved me, or because I was the perfect candidate for a CEO's wife, educated enough to be presentable, traditional enough to please your parents, quiet enough to not disturb your perfect world. The truth of her words struck him like physical blows, but before he could respond, his phone buzzed, another message from Dr. Thompson. Mr. Chun, we need to discuss your test results further. This is important. James deleted the message, his guilt mixing with fear, creating a toxic cocktail in his stomach. The weight of expectations, lies, and unspoken truths threatened to drown him, just like the koi swimming endless circles in their manufactured pond. "We need to talk," May said, her voice stronger than he'd heard it in months. She stood in their living room, backlit by the city lights twinkling through floor-to-ceiling windows. James loosened his tie, a nervous habit he'd developed. "About what happened at dinner. My parents were out of line." "No," May cut him off. "About us, about our future, about children." The word hung between them like a suspended blade. James felt his control slipping. "There's nothing to discuss," he said sharply, walking toward his home office. "You know my position on this." May stepped in front of him, blocking his escape route. Her eyes blazed with determination. "No more running, James. No more hiding behind your work, behind your excuses." "They're not excuses." His voice rose, echoing off the high ceilings. "I've told you, I can't or won't," May challenged. "Because I saw how you looked when that nurse brought your cousin's baby to the family dinner last month. I saw the longing in your eyes." James's hands began to shake. The truth from Dr. Thompson's office burned in his throat, threatening to escape. "You don't understand," he whispered. "Then help me understand," May pleaded, reaching for his hand. "Because right now, all I see is a man so terrified of losing control that he's willing to sacrifice everything we dreamed of." "Dreams?" James laughed bitterly, pulling away. "Dreams don't build empires, May. Dreams don't secure futures. I've worked too hard to let what? Love in? Family? The possibility of failure." May's voice cracked. "You're so focused on your empire that you can't see it's already crumbling." The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, its cry matching the anguish in May's eyes. "I forbid it," James finally said, his voice cold and final. "No children. Not now, not ever. If you can't accept that, then what?" May's voice was barely a whisper. "Then perhaps we need to reconsider this marriage." The words fell like bombs in their perfect living room, destroying everything in their wake. May stepped back as if physically struck, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a sob. "So that's it?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. "Your final word?" James turned away, unable to bear the sight of her pain, unable to face the truth burning in his pocket. Dr. Thompson's test results that could change everything. "That's my final word," he confirmed, his voice hollow. May nodded slowly, something shifting in her eyes, something that looked like determination, or perhaps goodbye. "Then you've made your choice," she said quietly, turning toward the stairs. "And now I'll make mine." James watched her go, unaware that this would be the last time he'd see his wife for a very long time. The sound of their bedroom door closing echoed through the house like a funeral bell, marking the death of something precious neither of them knew how to save. One morning, James found May sitting in the kitchen, staring at her untouched breakfast. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her usually immaculate appearance showed signs of neglect. "You're up early," he attempted, pouring his coffee. May didn't respond, her gaze fixed on the window where a bird was building its nest. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. "I have a board meeting at 9, James continued, desperate to fill the silence. "Then dinner with the investors from... Do you remember our wedding day?" May interrupted, her voice hollow. "When we wrote our own vows?" James's hand froze midway to his coffee cup. Of course he remembered. It was the last time he'd allowed himself to be truly vulnerable. "You promised to build a life with me," she continued, finally turning to face him. "Not an empire, not a legacy, a life." "May, please. I watch you, you know," she said, standing up slowly. "Every morning you check your stocks before you check on me. Every night you kiss your laptop goodnight instead of your wife. You've built your walls so high, James, that even you can't escape them anymore." Her words hit him like physical blows, each one cracking his carefully constructed facade. "I'm dying inside these walls," she whispered, pressing her hand against her chest. "Every day, A little more of me fades away. The teacher who loved helping children learn. The woman who dreamed of hearing little feet running through these halls. She's disappearing. James reached for her, but she stepped back, shaking her head. Don't, she said. Don't touch me unless you're ready to feel something real. He watched helplessly as she walked away, her small frame carrying the weight of their shared dreams. That evening, when he returned home late as usual, he found her dinner plate untouched in the kitchen. The house felt emptier than ever, filled with the ghosts of conversations they should have had. In his home office, surrounded by screens showing rising stock prices and profit margins, James pulled out Dr. Thompson's test results from his desk drawer. The paper felt heavy in his hands, weighted with the truth he couldn't bring himself to share. Outside, the bird continued building its nest, preparing for a future that would soon arrive, whether it was ready or not. Congratulations, Mrs. Chun. Dr. Liu smiled warmly. You're about 6 weeks pregnant. And she paused, studying the ultrasound screen. There's something else you should know. May's heart stopped. Is something wrong? No, quite the opposite. Dr. Liu turned the screen. Do you see these two distinct shapes? You're carrying twins. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. May pressed her hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Joy, fear, and despair warred within her heart. Later that evening, she stood in their bathroom, staring at her reflection. Her hand rested on her still flat stomach, knowing that beneath lay not one, but two tiny lives that James had explicitly forbidden. What am I going to do? She whispered to her reflection. What am I going to do? Her phone buzzed. James's message. Working late. Don't wait up. May walked to their bedroom, pulling out an old wooden box from under the bed. Inside lay her grandmother's jade pendant, some savings, and her old passport. Her fingers traced the worn edges of the document as memories flooded back of the independent woman she used to be, the teacher who followed her dreams. She moved to her desk, pulling out paper and pen. The words flowed like tears. Dearest James, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I'm carrying a miracle, 2 miracles, actually, that you've made clear you don't want. I won't force you to face a future you've rejected, but I won't reject this gift either. You once told me that dreams don't build empires. Perhaps not, but they do build lives worth living. I'm choosing life, James. I'm choosing love. I hope someday you'll understand. May. Her hands shook as she placed the letter on his pillow. Moving quickly now, she packed a small suitcase, just enough to start over. As she closed the front door quietly behind her, the garden's wilting roses seemed to bow their heads in farewell. In the taxi to the airport, May touched her stomach gently. It's just us now, little ones, she whispered in Mandarin. But don't worry. Mama will give you enough love for 2 parents. The city lights blurred through her tears as the taxi wound its way through the streets. Behind her, the towering Chan Innovations building stood like a sentinel against the night sky, its lights burning bright and cold, just like the man who ruled from its heights. Her childhood home stood exactly as she remembered, a modest 2-story house with climbing jasmine and her mother's herb garden. The moment she stepped through the gate, her mother, Lin Wei, rushed out. May! Her mother's face creased with concern. What's wrong? Why didn't you tell us you were coming? May collapsed into her mother's arms, the weight of her secrets finally breaking free. Mama, I'm pregnant. Inside, over steaming cups of oolong tea, May told her parents everything. Her father, once a respected professor, listened silently, his weathered hands gripping his teacup. Twins, her mother whispered, tears glistening. Heaven has blessed you twice. James doesn't know, May admitted, her voice breaking. He can never know. That man. Her father finally spoke, his voice tight with anger. He treats marriage like a business contract. Baba, please. No, May. He stood, pacing the small living room. I watched you wilt like an autumn flower in that golden cage. When you married him, I thought. We all thought many things. Her mother interrupted gently. She turned to May, taking her hands. But now, daughter, what will you do? May looked around the familiar room, at the faded photographs on the walls showing her childhood, her graduation, her life before James. Her hand instinctively moved to her stomach. "I'll teach again," she said, determination strengthening her voice. "The international school near Westlake always needs Mandarin teachers. I've already contacted them." "You'll stay here," her mother declared, brooking no argument. "Your old room is waiting. These babies will need their grandmother's soup and their grandfather's stories." That night, lying in her childhood bed, May heard her parents talking in hushed voices downstairs. Her phone lay silent. She turned it off after leaving the letter. She imagined James coming home to their empty house, finding her note. Would he understand? Would he even care? A soft breeze carried the scent of jasmine through her window, and for the first time in years, May felt like she could breathe freely. Her hands cradled her stomach, where her tiny secrets grew stronger each day. "We're home, little ones," she whispered in the darkness. "Not in a mansion, but in a house filled with love. Sometimes the richest lives are built on the simplest foundations." Outside, the moon reflected on Westlake's surface, its light touching both the ancient pavilions and modern skyscrapers, a reminder that sometimes the past and future could coexist beautifully, if only given the chance. "Mr. Chun," his assistant's voice crackled through his phone. "The Beijing investors are waiting in the conference room." "Cancel everything," he barked, his voice raw. Everything. For the first time in his career, James Chun lost track of time. He wandered through their house like a ghost, touching the things May had left behind: her favorite teacup, still sitting in the kitchen, her gardening gloves by the wilting roses, the faint scent of jasmine on her pillow. "Where are you?" he whispered to the empty rooms, dialing her number for the 100th time. The automated response mocked him. "The number you have reached is no longer in service." In his desperation, he called her friends, former colleagues, anyone who might know something. Each call led nowhere, each dead end fueling his growing panic. Late that night, he sat in her garden, surrounded by the dying flowers she'd lovingly tended. A security guard approached cautiously. "Sir, we've checked all the security footage as requested. Mrs. Chun took a taxi to the airport 3 days ago." "And," James demanded, his voice hoarse, "she purchased a ticket with cash. We lost her after that." James dismissed the guard with a wave, his other hand clutching Dr. Thompson's test results. The truth he'd been too cowardly to share. The paper had become worn from constant handling, the words blurring together. Previous diagnosis incorrect, fertility levels normal. Fully capable of fathering children. His phone buzzed. His mother. "Have you found her?" Eleanor Chen's voice was sharp with concern. "No," James whispered. "This is what happens when you put business before family," his mother scolded. "When you forget the values that built our fortune in the first place." "Mother, No, you listen to me, James Chun. Your grandfather didn't build this empire so you could sit alone in an empty house. He built it for family, for legacy, for love." The word love echoed in his mind, reminding him of all the times he'd pushed it aside for control, for success, for his perfect plan. Standing in the moonlight, surrounded by the withering remnants of May's garden, James Chun, the man who controlled everything, finally lost control. His knees hit the ground, and for the first time since he was a child, he wept. "I'll find you, May," he promised the night sky. "Whatever it takes, I'll find you." But the stars offered no response, and somewhere in China, his wife was building a new life, carrying a secret that would change everything. "Mrs. Chen," Principal Zhang called after her one afternoon, "perhaps you should consider reducing your teaching hours?" May smiled, one hand resting on her 5-month bump. "I'm carrying twins, Principal Zhang, not made of glass." In her classroom, surrounded by eager young faces, May found pieces of herself she thought she'd lost. The joy of teaching, of watching understanding bloom in children's eyes, filled the void that James's ambition had created. "Teacher May," little Sophie asked during break time, "why does your belly have 2 babies?" "Because," May answered, her eyes twinkling. Sometimes life gives you double blessings. At home, her mother fussed constantly, preparing traditional soups and medicines. That evening, as they sat in the garden watching the sunset over West Lake, Lin Wei noticed her daughter's distant expression. "You're thinking about him again," her mother said softly. May touched her stomach, feeling the twins' movements. "I felt them kick for the first time today. I almost reached for my phone to tell him." Her mother took her hand. "Your father was just as driven when we were young. Success can be like a drug, blinding men to what truly matters. James wasn't just blind, Mama. He chose not to see." Inside, May's phone lay buried in a drawer, its SIM card destroyed. Sometimes late at night, she'd dream of James finding her letter, imagining his reaction. Would he be angry? Relieved? Would he even care? "Miss Lin!" A voice called from the street. She'd started using her maiden name again. It was Mrs. Wu, her elderly neighbor. "I brought you mooncakes. The babies need sweetness to grow strong." May accepted the treats gratefully, touched by how the community had embraced her. Here, she wasn't Mrs. Chun, the CEO's perfect wife. She was just May, the teacher expecting twins, whose smile was slowly returning. That night, as she prepared for bed, she caught her reflection in the mirror. Her body had changed dramatically. No more designer dresses or perfect makeup. Instead, she wore comfortable cotton and let her hair fall naturally. The twins moved beneath her hands, as if dancing to an ancient rhythm. "Your father lives in a world of numbers and charts," she whispered to them. "But you'll grow up in a world of stories and songs, of lake breezes and grandmother's love." A tear slipped down her cheek as she remembered James's words. Dreams don't build empires. But looking around at her modest childhood home, filled with more love and life than their mansion ever held, she realized something profound. "Maybe," she whispered to her unborn children, "we don't need an empire at all." "Mama," May gasped, gripping her mother's hand through another contraction. "I'm scared." Lin Wei wiped the sweat from her daughter's brow. "You're stronger than you know, my little lotus. Your babies are coming to meet you." Hours passed in a blur of pain and determination. As dawn broke over Hangzhou, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds, two tiny cries pierced the air. "Congratulations, Mrs. Lin," the doctor beamed, holding up two squirming bundles. A boy and a girl. May's tears flowed freely as she cradled her newborns for the first time. The boy had James's strong jawline, while the girl had May's delicate nose. Both had a dusting of dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom of their ancestors. "Hello, my little ones," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I'm your mama." As she gazed at their perfect faces, a wave of conflicting emotions washed over her. Joy at their arrival, fear for the future, and a deep, aching sadness that James wasn't there to share this moment. Her father entered the room, his eyes misty. "They're beautiful, May, like little dragons." "What will you name them?" her mother asked softly. May looked down at her son, his tiny fist wrapped around her finger. "Liang," she said. "It means bright. And for my daughter." She paused, remembering the garden she'd left behind in California. "Hua. It means flower." As the days passed, May discovered the challenges and joys of motherhood. Sleepless nights were punctuated by moments of pure bliss, Liang's first smile, Hua's gurgling laugh. But in the quiet moments, when the twins were finally asleep, the weight of her secret pressed heavily on her heart. One night, as she sat by the window, nursing Hua while Liang slept nearby, she found herself speaking softly to her daughter. "Your father, he's a complicated man," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "He built an empire of technology, always reaching for the stars. But he forgot how to look at the beauty right in front of him." Hua blinked up at her, tiny fingers curling around the jade pendant May always wore. "Maybe one day," May continued, her eyes misting, "he'll learn that the greatest innovations aren't made of silicon and code, but of flesh and blood and love." Outside, the cherry blossoms were beginning to bloom, their delicate petals a reminder of life's fragility and beauty. May held her daughter close, breathing in her sweet scent. "We'll be okay, little one," she murmured, as much to herself as to Hua. "We have each other, and that's more than enough." But even as she spoke the words, a part of her couldn't help but wonder. Would James ever know the joy of holding his children? And if he did, would it be enough to change him? "Mr. Chun," his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "The Tokyo merger is ready for your final approval." James stared blankly at the stack of documents on his desk. Once, this deal would have been the crowning achievement of his career. Now it felt hollow. "Mr. Chun?" the assistant prompted again. "Cancel it," he said abruptly. "Sir? But the board—" "I said cancel it," James snapped, slamming his fist on the desk. The photo frame beside his computer toppled, the glass cracking as it hit the floor. It was their wedding photo, the last time he remembered seeing May truly happy. Kneeling to pick up the shards, James cut his finger. He watched the blood well up, feeling more alive than he had in months. The pain was almost welcome, a physical manifestation of the emotional agony he'd been suppressing. Later that evening, he found himself in May's abandoned garden. The roses she'd lovingly tended had long since withered, but to his surprise, a single bud had emerged from the dry earth. "How?" he whispered, touching the delicate petals. "How did you survive without her care?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. James sank to his knees, the manicured lawn soaking through his expensive suit. For the first time in his life, the great James Chun felt utterly lost. "May," he whispered to the night sky. "Where are you? What have I done?" His phone buzzed, another message from his mother. She'd been relentless in her attempts to locate May, leveraging every connection the Chun family had. But China was vast, and May had vanished like mist. With trembling hands, James opened his safe and pulled out the documents he'd been avoiding for months, divorce papers drawn up by his lawyers. They'd assured him it was the prudent move to protect the company's assets. He'd nodded along, numb to everything but the gnawing emptiness in his chest. Now, staring at the papers, something inside James finally broke. The man who had always prided himself on his control, on his ability to predict and manipulate outcomes, realized he had failed at the most important equation of all, love. "No," he said firmly, tearing the papers in half. "No more running. No more hiding." Standing up, James looked at his reflection in the window. The man staring back at him was a stranger, haggard, lost, but with a flicker of determination in his eyes. "I'll find you, May," he vowed, his voice gaining strength. "I'll search every corner of China if I have to, and when I do, I'll make this right. Somehow, I'll make this right." As if in response, a gentle breeze rustled through the garden, carrying the faint scent of jasmine, May's favorite. It was a reminder of everything he'd taken for granted, and everything he stood to lose if he didn't act now. "Liang, Hua, not so fast," she called out, her heart swelling with joy as their giggles echoed across the water. Nearby, an elderly couple smiled at the scene. "Your children are beautiful," the old woman said. "You must have a very proud husband." May's smile faltered for a moment. "Thank you," she replied softly, her hand instinctively touching the jade pendant she still wore. Later that evening, as she tucked the twins into bed, Liang reached up and touched her cheek. "Mama said." May's breath caught in her throat. At barely a year old, her son was already so perceptive. She gathered both children into her arms, inhaling their sweet baby scent. "No, my little dragons," she whispered. "Mama is happy, so very happy, and it wasn't a lie." The past year had been a journey of rediscovery. She'd found strength she never knew she possessed, a resilience that surprised even her parents. "May," her father called from downstairs. "There's someone here to see you." Curious, May descended the stairs to find Principal Zhang from the international school waiting in the living room. "Mrs. Lin," he began, using the name she'd adopted. "I have a proposition for you." As Principal Zhang outlined his offer, a position as head of the Mandarin department, with flexible hours to accommodate her children, May felt a surge of pride. This was recognition of her skills, her dedication, not just her status as someone's wife. I don't know what to say, she stammered. Say yes, her mother urged, squeezing her hand. You've blossomed this past year, May. It's time the world saw your true colors. Later that night, after accepting the position, May stood on the balcony overlooking West Lake. The moon's reflection shimmered on the water, reminding her of the koi pond in her old California garden. For a moment, she allowed herself to wonder about James. Had he looked for her? Did he ever think about the life they could have had? Shaking her head, she banished those thoughts. The woman who had lived for James's approval was gone. In her place stood a mother, a teacher, a woman coming into her own power. I did it, little ones, she whispered to the sleeping twins. Mama built a life for us, not an empire of steel and glass, but a kingdom of love and laughter. As she turned to go inside, a shooting star streaked across the sky. For a fleeting moment, May felt a connection to something greater than herself, a cosmic reassurance that she was on the right path. Little did she know that halfway across the world, James Chun was boarding a plane to China, determination etched on his face and a crumpled photo of May clutched in his hand. The winds of change were blowing, carrying with them the promise of an unexpected reunion and the potential for redemption. Mama, look! Liang tugged at her skirt, pointing excitedly at a dragon dance performance. Beside him, Hua clapped her tiny hands in delight. May's heart swelled with pride as she watched her twins, now nearly 18 months old, taking in the sights and sounds of their heritage. Their dark eyes, so like James's, sparkled with curiosity and joy. Mrs. Lin, Principal Zhang approached, beaming. Your student's calligraphy display is drawing quite a crowd. You should be proud. May smiled, adjusting Hua on her hip. Thank you, Principal Zhang. The children worked so hard. Her words caught in her throat as she glanced over the principal's shoulder. There, across the crowded square, stood a figure that made her heart stop. Tall, impeccably dressed in a suit that seemed out of place among the festive attire. His face a mixture of disbelief and longing. James. Time seemed to stand still as their eyes met across the sea of people. The sounds of the festival faded away, leaving only the thunderous beating of May's heart. May! Principal Zhang's voice sounded distant. Are you all right? You've gone pale. Liang, sensing his mother's distress, wrapped his arms around her leg. Mama! The touch of her son snapped May back to reality. She tore her gaze away from James, focusing on her children. They were her world now, her strength. I'm fine, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Please excuse us. With trembling legs, May guided Liang through the crowd, Hua still clinging to her. She could feel James's eyes following her, burning with questions she wasn't ready to answer. Finding a quiet corner near the West Lake promenade, May sank onto a bench, gathering her children close. Her mind raced. How had he found her? What did he want? And most importantly, how could she protect the life she'd built? Mama, who that man? Liang asked, his perceptive eyes searching her face. May swallowed hard, fighting back tears. How could she explain to her children that the stranger who had caused such turmoil was their father? A man who had once told her that dreams didn't build empires, unaware that she carried the most precious empire of all within her. As the festival continued around them, fireworks exploding in brilliant colors over West Lake, May realized that the carefully constructed world she'd built over the past year and a half was about to change forever. The past and present were colliding, and the future hung in the balance, as uncertain as the reflection of fireworks shimmering on the lake's surface. As he approached the bench where May sat, James felt as if he were moving through a dream. The noise of the festival faded to a distant hum, the colorful lanterns blurring into a haze of light. All he could see was May, her face a mixture of fear and defiance, and the two small figures huddled close to her. May, he breathed, his voice barely audible above the distant sounds of celebration. I've been searching for you. May stood, positioning herself protectively in front of the children. "James," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "What are you doing here?" James took a step closer, his eyes moving from May to the children. The boy, with James's own determined jawline, stared up at him with curiosity. The girl, nestled in May's arms, had her mother's delicate features. Both had his eyes. "Are they?" He couldn't finish the question, the implications overwhelming him. May lifted her chin, her gaze unwavering. "Yes, James. Meet Liang and Hua. Your children." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. James staggered backward, gripping a nearby railing for support. "But how? When? You told me dreams don't build empires," May said softly, her voice tinged with both sorrow and strength. "But you were wrong. They built this." She gestured to the twins. Liang tugged at his mother's skirt. "Mama, who he?" James felt his heart constrict at the word mama, and the realization that these children, his children, didn't know him at all. I'm your..." James started, but the words caught in his throat. May knelt down, gathering both children close. "This is James," she said softly. He's your father." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future. James felt tears prick his eyes as he looked at the family he never knew he had, the life he'd been blind to. In that moment, as fireworks burst overhead and the scent of jasmine wafted on the breeze, James Chan, the man who had built a technological empire, realized he was facing the most important negotiation of his life. Not for a business deal or a merger, but for a chance to be part of the most precious thing he'd ever created. "May," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "Please, can we talk?" May hesitated, her arms tightening around the twins. The past year and a half flashed through her mind, the pain, the growth, the joy she'd found in her new life. But as she looked into James's eyes, she saw something she'd never seen before: humility, fear, and a desperate hope. "All right," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "We'll talk." As they moved towards a quieter area of the promenade, the festival continued around them, oblivious to the drama unfolding. The future hung in the balance, as delicate and unpredictable as the lanterns floating on West Lake's tranquil surface. James cleared his throat, his eyes fixed on the children. "They're beautiful, May. They're perfect." May nodded, her hand instinctively moving to touch the jade pendant at her throat. "They are. But James, why are you here? After all this time?" His gaze met hers, and for the first time, May saw vulnerability in those once steely eyes. "I was wrong, May. So terribly wrong. When you left, I realized what I'd lost. Not just you, but the future we could have had. The future you said you didn't want," May reminded him, her voice tinged with hurt. James flinched at her words. "I know. I was a fool. Blinded by ambition, by the need for control. But May, the day I found your letter, something in me broke. And then I learned the truth." May's brow furrowed. "What truth?" "The medical diagnosis, it was wrong. I can have children. I always could." His voice cracked with emotion. "By the time I found out, you were gone." The revelation hit May like a physical blow. All those arguments, all that pain, based on a mistake? "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Because I was a coward," James admitted, his shoulders slumping. "I was afraid. Afraid of failing as a father, afraid of losing control. It was easier to hide behind work, behind success. But when you left, I realized success meant nothing without you." Liang, sensing the tension, toddled over to May, his small hand reaching for hers. "Mama said." May pulled him close, kissing the top of his head. "No, darling. Mama's just thinking." James watched the interaction, his heart aching for what he'd missed. "May, I know I have no right to ask, but is there any chance? Any chance at all that I could be part of their lives?" The question hung in the air, heavy with possibility and fear. May looked at James, really looked at him for the first time in years. The arrogant CEO was gone, replaced by a man humbled by loss and desperate for redemption. "I don't know, James," she said honestly. "I've built a life here. The children are happy. I'm happy. It's not the empire you wanted, but it's ours." "I understand," James nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "But May, I'm not asking to reclaim an empire. I'm asking for a chance to build something new, something real." As if on cue, Hua tottered over to James, her tiny hand reaching out to touch his knee. She looked up at him with curious eyes, and smiled. James felt his heart melt. With trembling hands, he gently picked up his daughter for the first time. As Hua settled against his chest, a tear slipped down his cheek. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I'm your Baba." May watched the interaction, her own eyes filling with tears. The future she'd imagined, the walls she'd built around her heart. Everything was shifting, realigning. As the festival fireworks painted the sky in brilliant colors, reflecting off the calm surface of Westlake, May realized that sometimes the most beautiful things are born from the ashes of what we thought we wanted. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning a new chapter. "One day at a time, James," she said softly. "We'll take it one day at a time." One sunny afternoon, May watched from the kitchen window as James attempted to teach Liang how to fly a kite in the backyard. The sight was both heartwarming and surreal. "Higher, Baba, higher!" Liang squealed with delight as the kite caught a gust of wind. James's face lit up with a joy May had never seen before. Gone was the sharp business suit, replaced by casual jeans and a t-shirt smudged with Hua's finger paints from their morning art session. "You're doing great, buddy," James encouraged, his eyes never leaving his son. May felt a hand on her shoulder and turned to find her mother standing beside her. "He's trying," Lin Wei said softly. "That counts for something, doesn't it?" May sighed, conflict evident in her eyes. "It does. But Mama, what if he leaves again? What if this is all too much for him?" Before her mother could respond, a cry from the living room signaled that Hua had woken from her nap. May moved to go, but James was already there, scooping up the little girl with a gentleness that surprised them all. "Hey there, little flower," he cooed, using the nickname he'd given her. "Did you have sweet dreams?" Hua's cries subsided as she snuggled into her father's chest, her tiny hand gripping his shirt. The intimacy of the moment brought tears to May's eyes. It was everything she had once dreamed of, yet the fear of losing it all again gnawed at her heart. Later that evening, after the twins were asleep, May and James sat on the porch swing, the night air heavy with the scent of blooming jasmine. "I have to go back soon," James said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. "The company. There are things I need to handle." May felt her heart constrict. "I see," she managed, trying to keep her voice steady. "So this is goodbye then?" James turned to her, his eyes intense. "No, May, not goodbye. Never goodbye again." He took a deep breath. I want to ask you something. It's okay if you say no, but I need to ask." May braced herself, unsure of what was coming. "Come back with me," James said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You and the twins. Come to California. Not to our old life, but to start something new. Together." The proposal hung in the air, as weighty as the humidity around them. May's mind raced with conflicting thoughts and emotions. "James, I don't know," she stammered. "My job here, the twins' routine, my parents. I know it's a lot to ask," James acknowledged, gently taking her hand. "But May, these past weeks have shown me what truly matters. I don't want to be the man I was before. I want to be the father our children deserve, the husband you always needed me to be." Tears welled in May's eyes. "And what if it doesn't work? What if we get there and you fall back into old habits?" James squeezed her hand. "Then we come back. No questions asked. I promise you, May, I will spend every day proving to you and our children that you are my priority. My empire isn't made of steel and glass anymore. It's made of laughter and tiny handprints and the love I feel for you three. As the cicadas chirped in the background and the moon cast a soft glow over the garden, May found herself at a crossroads. The safe, predictable life she'd built in Hangzhou beckoned, but so did the promise of a new beginning with the man she'd never truly stopped loving. "I need time," she whispered, her voice trembling. "To think, to talk to my parents, to be sure." James nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course. Take all the time you need. I'll be here, May. I'm not running anymore." As they sat there, hands intertwined, the future stretched before them, uncertain, frightening, but also filled with possibility. The story of James and May, once thought to be over, was poised for a new chapter. But what that chapter would hold remained to be seen, as delicate and unpredictable as the jasmine blooms swaying in the night breeze. Moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow on Liang and Hua's sleeping faces. May's heart swelled with love as she watched their tiny chests rise and fall. Liang had kicked off his blanket, his little fist curled around the stuffed dragon James had given him. Hua clutched her favorite doll, a serene smile playing on her lips. "What should we do, my little ones?" May whispered, gently stroking Liang's hair. "Is it time for a new adventure? Or should we stay in our safe harbor?" As if in response, Hua stirred in her sleep, mumbling softly, "Baba!" The word sent a jolt through May's heart. In just a few short weeks, James had become such an integral part of their lives. The twins adored him, and May couldn't deny the joy that lit up their faces when he was around. Lost in thought, she didn't hear the soft footsteps behind her until her mother's gentle hand rested on her shoulder. "You're worried about making the right choice," Lin Wei said, her voice low so as not to wake the children. May nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Mama, how can I be sure? What if I'm making a terrible mistake?" Lin Wei guided her daughter out of the room and into the kitchen, where she began brewing a pot of oolong tea, a ritual that had comforted May since childhood. "My dear," Lin Wei began, her wise eyes twinkling in the dim light, "life rarely gives us certainty, but it does give us moments of clarity, if we're brave enough to recognize them." "What do you mean?" May asked, accepting the steaming cup of tea. "I've watched you these past weeks," her mother continued. "I've seen the way you look at James when he's playing with the twins. The smile that lights up your face when he makes you laugh. It's the same look you had when you first fell in love with him." May's hands tightened around the warm cup. "But what if it doesn't last? What if we go back and everything falls apart again?" Lin Wei reached across the table, taking her daughter's hand. "May, my brave girl, you've already survived the worst. You built a beautiful life here on your own. If things don't work out, you'll do it again. But if you don't try, you'll always wonder what could have been." As the first rays of dawn began to peek through the window, May felt a sense of calm settle over her. She thought of James, probably still asleep in his rented apartment, who had uprooted his entire life to be here with them. "I think," May said slowly, a smile spreading across her face, "it's time for us to go home." Later that morning, as James arrived for his daily visit, May met him at the gate. Her heart raced as she saw the hopeful look in his eyes. "James," she began, taking a deep breath, "I've made a decision." He stood perfectly still, as if afraid any movement might shatter the moment. "We'll come with you," May continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "To California, to start our new life together." James's face lit up with joy, but before he could speak, May held up her hand. "But I have conditions," she said firmly. "We take it slow. I keep my teaching job even if it means working remotely. And if at any point it becomes too much, if we feel like we're losing ourselves again, we reevaluate. Together." James nodded solemnly, understanding the weight of her words. "Together," he agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "Always together from now on." As they embraced, the sound of little feet pattering down the path reached their ears. Liang and Hua burst out of the house, squealing with delight at the sight of their father. "Baba! Mama!" they cried in unison, wrapping their arms around their parents' legs. In that moment, As the morning sun bathed them in golden light, May felt a sense of rightness settle over her. The future was still uncertain, filled with challenges they had yet to face. But as she looked at James, saw the love and determination in his eyes, she knew that whatever came next, they would face it as a family. The journey ahead was long, but the first step had been taken. A new chapter was beginning, not just for May and James, but for Liang and Hua as well. It was a story of second chances, of love reborn, and of the incredible strength found in forgiveness and hope. "Mama, we flying like dragons," Liang exclaimed, his eyes wide with wonder. May smiled, ruffling his hair. "Yes, my little one, we're on a big adventure." James, seated across the aisle, caught her eye and gave her a reassuring nod. The gesture was small, but it spoke volumes about how far they'd come. As the plane began its descent into San Francisco, May felt her heart rate quicken. The familiar skyline came into view, a jumble of memories, both good and painful, flooding her mind. "Welcome home," James said softly as they disembarked, his hand gently touching the small of her back. May took a deep breath, the cool California air filling her lungs. "It's not the same home we left," she reminded him, her voice a mix of hope and caution. "No," James agreed, hoisting Hua onto his hip as she began to fuss. "It's going to be better." The drive from the airport to their new house was a stark contrast to their old life. Instead of heading to their former mansion in the hills, James turned onto a tree-lined street in a quiet, family-friendly neighborhood. "Here we are," he announced, pulling into the driveway of a modest but charming craftsman-style home. May's eyebrows rose in surprise. "James, this isn't. It's not what you expected?" He finished for her, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "I thought, well, I wanted us to have a fresh start, somewhere that could be ours, not a reminder of our past." As they stepped inside, May was struck by the warmth of the place. Sunlight streamed through large windows, illuminating hardwood floors and cozy spaces. It was nothing like the cold, minimalist design of their old house. "Mama, Baba, look," Liang called out, having already discovered the backyard. "A tree house," James chuckled, setting Hua down so she could toddle after her brother. "I may have made a few additions," he admitted sheepishly. May wandered through the rooms, taking in the thoughtful details, a spacious kitchen perfect for family meals, a study where she could continue her remote teaching, and a playroom filled with toys for the twins. In the master bedroom, she found James standing by the window, watching the children explore the backyard. "What do you think?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. May joined him, leaning against his shoulder. It's perfect, James. But how did you manage all this?" He turned to face her, his eyes serious. "I've been busy while you were deciding. I've restructured the company, delegated more responsibilities. I even hired a COO to handle day-to-day operations. But your work, your empire," May began, remembering the driven man she'd left behind. James shook his head, cupping her face gently. "My empire is right here, May. You Liang Hua, you're all that matters now. I meant what I said in Hangzhou. I'm not that man anymore." Tears welled in May's eyes as the weight of his words sank in. This was more than just a new house. It was a testament to James's commitment to change. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over their new home, May felt a surge of emotions, hope, love, and yes, still a hint of fear. But as she watched James chase the giggling twins around the yard, she realized that some risks were worth taking. Later that night, after tucking the exhausted children into their new beds, May and James stood on the back porch, the unfamiliar chirping of California crickets filling the air. "Are you happy?" James asked, his arm wrapped around her waist. May leaned into him, breathing in the scent of jasmine from the plants he'd added to the garden, a touch of their old home in this new beginning. "I think I could be," she answered honestly. "We still have a long way to go, James." He nodded, pulling her closer. "I know, but we're on this journey together now. No more running, no more hiding. Just us, building the life we always should have had." As they stood there, under the canopy of stars, May felt a sense of peace wash over her. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges they had yet to face. But for the first time in years, she felt like they were truly partners, ready to face whatever came their way. The story of James and May was far from over. In fact, it felt like it was just beginning, a tale of redemption, of second chances, and of the extraordinary power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. One crisp autumn evening, as the leaves in their backyard began to turn golden, May found herself alone in the kitchen, preparing dinner. The sound of laughter drifted in from the living room, where James was attempting to teach Liang and Hua a simple card game. "No, Baba," Hua giggled. "That's not how you play Go Fish." "Oh, really?" James's voice was filled with mock indignation. "And who made you the expert, little flower?" May smiled to herself, chopping vegetables with practiced ease. The domesticity of the moment struck her. How different this was from their old life of catered meals and formal dining rooms. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, shattering the peaceful atmosphere. May froze, knife hovering over a carrot. They weren't expecting anyone. "I'll get it," James called out, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. May strained to hear, her heart racing inexplicably. The murmur of voices at the door grew louder, more intense. Then silence. "May," James's voice was tight with tension. "Can you come here, please?" Wiping her hands on a dish towel, May made her way to the front door, where James stood rigidly, his face pale. Behind him, framed in the doorway, were his parents, Eleanor and Richard Chun. "Hello, May," Eleanor said, her voice as cool and composed as ever. "It's been a long time." May felt as if the ground had dropped out from beneath her feet. The last time she'd seen her in-laws was at that fateful dinner party, before everything fell apart. "What are you doing here?" she managed to ask, instinctively moving closer to James. Richard Chun stepped forward, his imposing figure filling the doorway. "We've come to see our grandchildren," he stated, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, "and to understand why our son has all but abandoned the company we built for him." James's jaw clenched. "I haven't abandoned anything, Father. I've simply reprioritized." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "Reprioritized? Is that what you call throwing away years of hard work and tradition?" The tension in the air was palpable, years of unresolved issues bubbling to the surface. May felt torn between the urge to protect her family and the ingrained respect for her elders. Just then, the patter of little feet announced the arrival of Liang and Hua, curious about the commotion. "Baba, who's that?" Liang asked, peeking out from behind James's leg. Eleanor's expression softened slightly at the sight of the children. "Oh my," she breathed. "They look just like James did at that age," Richard finished, a hint of emotion cracking through his stern facade. For a moment, everyone stood frozen, the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future hanging heavy in the air. May looked at James, saw the conflict in his eyes, the little boy still seeking approval, the man determined to forge his own path. "Perhaps," May said, breaking the silence, "you'd like to stay for dinner? We have plenty, and I'm sure there's a lot to discuss." James shot her a grateful look, squeezing her hand. Eleanor and Richard exchanged glances, years of practiced communication passing between them. "That would be acceptable," Eleanor finally said. As they made their way to the dining room, the twins chattering excitedly about meeting their new grandparents, May felt a mix of anxiety and hope. This unexpected visit could either heal old wounds or open new ones. James pulled her aside for a moment, his voice low. "Are you sure about this?" May took a deep breath, looking into his eyes. "No," she admitted, "but they're family, and if we're truly starting over, maybe this is where we need to begin." As they joined the others at the table, the air thick with unspoken words and cautious hope, May realized that their journey was far from over. The past had come knocking, demanding to be acknowledged. How they handled this evening could shape not just their future, but that of Liang and Hua as well. The story of the Qin family was entering a new chapter, one filled with the potential for reconciliation, understanding, and perhaps even forgiveness. As May began serving the meal, she silently prayed that the love that had brought her and James back together would be strong enough to bridge the generational divide that now sat at their dining table. Eleanor's eyes darted around the modest room, taking in every detail. "This is quite different from what we're used to," she remarked, her tone carefully neutral. James straightened, a hint of defiance in his voice. "It's home, Mother. Our home." Richard cleared his throat, his gaze fixed on his son. "James, we need to discuss the company. The board is in upheaval. Shareholders are demanding answers." May felt her heart sink. She'd known this moment would come, but she'd hoped for at least a few moments of peace first. "Not now, Father," James said firmly, serving rice to Hua. "This is family time." "Family time." Richard's voice rose slightly. "The company is our family legacy. It's your responsibility." "My responsibility," James interrupted, his eyes flashing, "is to my wife and children. The company will survive without my constant attention." The tension in the room thickened. May watched as Liang and Hua's smiles faded, sensing the adults' discomfort. She had to do something. "Liang, Hua," she said brightly, "why don't you tell Nai Nai and Yi Yi about your new school?" The twins perked up, launching into animated descriptions of their classmates and favorite subjects. Eleanor and Richard's expressions softened as they listened, occasionally asking questions. As the meal progressed, the conversation gradually became less strained. Eleanor complimented May on the food, genuinely surprised by its quality. Richard, between bites, shared stories of James's childhood that had the twins giggling. But beneath the surface, May could sense the unresolved issues simmering. She caught James's eye across the table, saw the mixture of love and determination in his gaze. They were in this together, facing whatever challenges came their way. As May cleared the dishes, Eleanor followed her into the kitchen. "You've changed him," the older woman said quietly. May turned, unsure how to respond. "James changed himself. He chose this life, this family." Eleanor's carefully composed facade cracked slightly. "And the company? The legacy we built for him?" May took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "The company is still important to James, but it's not his entire world anymore. Isn't that what you wanted for him? A balanced life?" A flicker of emotion crossed Eleanor's face. Regret, perhaps, or understanding. "We pushed him so hard," she admitted. "We wanted him to have everything we didn't." In the dining room, they could hear James and Richard's voices rising again, the old arguments resurfacing. May felt a surge of protectiveness. "Mrs. Chun," she said softly, "James is an incredible father and husband. He's found a way to balance his work with his family. Isn't that success too?" Eleanor was silent for a long moment, her gaze drifting to where Liang and Hua played in the living room. "Perhaps," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, "perhaps we've been measuring success by the wrong metrics all along." As they rejoined the others, May saw James and his father locked in an intense discussion. But there was something different in their postures, less confrontational, more open. "A compromise," Richard was saying. "You oversee strategic decisions, but leave day-to-day operations to the team you've built." James nodded slowly. "I can work with that, as long as it doesn't interfere with my time here, with my family." The tension in the room eased palpably. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. As the evening drew to a close, Eleanor and Richard prepared to leave. To everyone's surprise, Hua ran up to Eleanor, wrapping her tiny arms around her grandmother's legs. "Come back soon, Nai Nai?" she asked, her eyes wide and hopeful. Eleanor's carefully maintained composure crumbled. She knelt down, hugging Hua tightly. "Yes, my little one. We'll come back very soon." As they watched the elder Chens drive away, May leaned into James's embrace. "That was intense, terrifying, a complete disaster," James offered, a wry smile on his face. May chuckled softly. "I was going to say a start. We're building bridges, James. It won't happen overnight, but we're trying." James kissed the top of her head, his arms tightening around her. "We're in this together, right? Always?" May replied, her heart full of love and hope for their future. As they tucked the twins into bed that night, surrounded by the warmth of their modest home, May realized that true wealth wasn't measured in stock prices or company assets. It was in the love that filled these walls, in the laughter of their children, and in the strength they found in each other. The Chun family's story was far from over. There would be more challenges, more difficult conversations, and undoubtedly more growth. But as May drifted off to sleep in James's arms, she felt a deep sense of peace. They had faced their past, embraced their present, and were ready to build a future together. One crisp spring morning, as cherry blossoms painted the neighborhood in soft pinks, May found herself facing an unexpected challenge. She sat in the doctor's office, her hands trembling slightly as she held the results of her recent tests. "Mrs. Chun," Dr. Patel said gently, "the results are clear. You're pregnant." May's world seemed to tilt on its axis. "But how? We were so careful." Dr. Patel smiled warmly. "Sometimes life has its own plans. From these results, I'd say you're about 8 weeks along." As May left the clinic, her mind raced. How would James react? They had found such a beautiful balance in their lives, with the twins now approaching their 4th birthday. Would this unexpected addition upset everything they had worked so hard to build? She drove home in a daze, barely noticing the beautiful spring day around her. As she pulled into the driveway, she saw James in the front yard, helping Hua plant sunflower seeds. "Look, Mama," Hua called out excitedly. "We're making a sun garden." James looked up, his smile fading as he caught sight of May's expression. "Everything okay, love?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. May nodded, forcing a smile. "Just tired. Why don't you two finish up out here? I'm going to start dinner." In the kitchen, May moved on autopilot, chopping vegetables and preparing the meal. Her mind whirled with possibilities and fears. Would James be happy about this unexpected pregnancy? Would he see it as a disruption to the careful balance they had achieved in their lives and careers? "May!" James's voice startled her from her thoughts. He stood in the doorway, worry etched on his face. "What's really going on? You've been cutting that same carrot for 5 minutes." She set the knife down, her hands shaking slightly. "James, I have something to tell you." His brow furrowed as he moved closer. "What is it? Is everything all right?" May took a deep breath, steeling herself. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. James's eyes widened, a myriad of emotions flickering across his face. Surprise, confusion, and then, "We're having another baby?" he whispered, a slow smile spreading across his face. May nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Are you happy about this?" James closed the distance between them, gathering her in his arms. "Happy? May, I'm ecstatic. This is incredible." His joy was infectious, and May felt her own fears begin to melt away. "But what about our plans? Your work, my teaching?" James pulled back slightly, cupping her face in his hands. "Plans change, love. We've proven that we can handle anything life throws our way. This baby, it's a blessing, not an obstacle." As they stood there in the kitchen, holding each other close, the sound of little feet pattering down the hallway reached their ears. "Mama, Baba, what's happening?" Liang asked, Hua peering curiously around her brother. James and May exchanged a glance, a silent conversation passing between them. With a nod, May knelt down to the twins' level. "Liang, Hua," she began, her voice filled with emotion. "How would you feel about becoming a big brother and sister?" The twins' eyes widened in unison. "A baby?" Hua squealed, jumping up and down. "We're going to have a little brother or sister?" Liang asked, his voice a mix of excitement and uncertainty. James joined them on the floor, gathering all three in a big hug. "That's right, little ones. Our family is growing." As they sat there on the kitchen floor, laughing and talking about the future, May felt a profound sense of peace wash over her. Life had once again thrown them a curveball, But this time, they were facing it together, not as two individuals, but as a family unit, stronger and more resilient than ever before. The Chun family's journey was taking yet another unexpected turn, but as May looked at the joy on James's face and felt the excited energy of the twins, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them with love, understanding, and the unshakable bond they had forged through all their trials and triumphs. One balmy summer evening, as the family enjoyed a picnic in their backyard, James received an unexpected call. His face grew serious as he listened, occasionally nodding and making affirmative sounds. May watched him intently, a knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. "Everything all right?" she asked as he ended the call. James ran a hand through his hair, a habit he'd developed when stressed. "That was the board. They want me to fly to New York for an emergency meeting. Apparently, there's a potential hostile takeover brewing." May's heart sank. They had worked so hard to find balance, and now this. "How long?" she asked, her hand instinctively moving to her swollen belly. "A week, maybe 2, James replied, his voice heavy with conflict. "May, I don't have to go. I can handle this remotely or send someone else." May studied his face, seeing the struggle within him. She knew how much he'd sacrificed to be present for their family, but she also understood the weight of his responsibilities. "You should go," she said softly, surprising herself with the words. James's eyebrows shot up. "Are you sure? With the baby coming in just a few months?" May reached out, taking his hand. "I'm sure. This is important, James. We've built a life where your work and our family can coexist. This is part of that." Relief and gratitude washed over James's face. He pulled May close, kissing her tenderly. "What did I do to deserve you?" As James prepared for his trip, May couldn't shake a nagging feeling of unease. She chalked it up to pregnancy hormones and the natural anxiety of being apart. The night before his departure, as they lay in bed, May turned to James, her voice barely above a whisper. "Promise me you'll be careful," she said, her fingers tracing the lines of his face. James pulled her closer, his hand resting on her belly where their unborn child nestled. "Always. You and the kids are my world, May. Nothing will keep me from coming back to you." The next morning, as they said their goodbyes at the airport, Leong tugged on James's sleeve. "Baba, you'll miss my soccer game," he said, his lower lip trembling slightly. James knelt down, looking his son in the eye. "I know, buddy, and I'm sorry, but I promise I'll watch the video Mama takes, and we'll have a special practice session when I get back. Okay?" Hua, not to be left out, threw her arms around James's neck. "Bring us presents, Baba." James chuckled, hugging both children tightly. "Of course, my little flower. Now you two be good for Mama, all right? Help her out and take care of each other." As James disappeared through the security checkpoint, May felt a sharp kick from the baby. She placed a hand on her stomach, whispering softly, "It's okay, little one. Baba will be back soon." The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. May threw herself into caring for the twins and preparing for the new baby, all while managing her remote teaching duties. But as the first weeks stretched into the second, and then beyond, she couldn't shake a growing sense of worry. James's calls became shorter, his voice tinged with stress. The takeover attempt was more serious than initially thought, and the long days of negotiations were taking their toll. One night, after putting the twins to bed, May sat alone in the quiet house, her hand resting on her belly. The baby was particularly active, as if sensing her distress. "James," she whispered into the darkness, "we need you here. Please come home soon." Just then, her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from James. "Meeting running late. Won't be able to call tonight. Miss you all. Love you." May's heart clenched. She understood the importance of what James was doing, but she couldn't help feeling a creeping fear. Was history repeating itself? Was the company once again threatening to consume the man she loved? As she made her way to bed, a sharp pain shot through her abdomen, causing her to gasp and lean against the wall for support. The baby kicked furiously, as if sharing her distress. "It's okay," she breathed, trying to calm herself and the child within her. Everything's going to be okay. But as she lay in the darkness, listening to the quiet breathing of her children in the next room, May couldn't shake the feeling that their carefully constructed balance was once again being tested. The future, which had seemed so certain just weeks ago, now felt fragile and uncertain. Would James return as the devoted family man he'd become, or would the allure of corporate power